The night Vincent Romano told his wife to sit with the servants, he signed the death warrant of everything he'd spent 30 years building. He just didn't know it yet. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, this story is for you. Watch until the end, because what Claire Bennett does next will stay with you. Hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The chandelier above the Romano ballroom held 412 crystal drops, and Claire knew because she had chosen every single one. She had spent 11 weeks in negotiation with an importer out of Prague, arguing over the refraction index of hand-cut versus machine-cut glass, because Vincent had wanted the light in that room to feel like standing inside a diamond. She had gotten him that light. She had also negotiated the price down 32% without telling him, redirecting the savings into a reserve account that had quietly kept 3 of his legitimate restaurants solvent during the federal audit of 2019. He had never asked where the audit money came from. He had accepted the outcome the way he accepted most things Claire arranged, as though the world simply bent to his will by nature. Tonight, the chandelier threw its fractured light across 400 guests, and Claire sat at the head table in a black dress she had selected because it was understated enough not to embarrass him, and she watched her husband hold court. Vincent Romano at 53 was still the kind of man who filled a room without trying. Broad shoulders, silver at the temples, the particular stillness of someone who had never once in his adult life felt physically threatened by another human being. He laughed at something Sal Marchetti said, and the men around him laughed a half-second later, that calibrated echo of people who understood that their comfort depended on his mood. Claire recognized the laugh. It was his performance laugh, the one with no warmth behind it, the one that meant he was already somewhere else in his head. She had learned to read him in the first year of their marriage. By the second year, she had understood that being able to read him was not the same as mattering to him. By the third year, she had made her peace with that and gotten to work. 12 years. 12 years of galas exactly like this one. 12 years of choosing flowers and caterers and seating charts that positioned rivals far enough apart to prevent incidents, while placing allies close enough to feel the warmth of association. 12 years of conversation she was never supposed to be having with city councilmen and federal liaisons and bankers who dealt in the kind of discretion that didn't come cheap. 12 years of being the woman at the edge of every photograph, the one whose name nobody printed. She sipped her water and watched Dominic Vega move through the room. Dominic was 38, Vincent's underboss for the past 4 years, and he wore his ambition the way some men wore cologne, present at all times, strongest when he leaned in close. He was working the room with the specific energy of a man building consensus, stopping to grip arms and lower his voice, spending slightly longer than necessary with the family heads from Detroit and from the New Jersey delegation. Claire had noticed it 40 minutes ago. She had been cataloging it since. The thing about being invisible was that you saw everything. She was watching Dominic pause at the bar when Vincent leaned toward her and said, quietly, in the tone he used for staff corrections, "You don't need to be at this table tonight." She turned to look at him. He was still facing the room. "Excuse me?" "The Caruso brothers are flying in. The Falcone people. This is business, Claire." He picked up his wine glass, examined the color of the Barolo against the chandelier light she had chosen. "Sit with Elena and the other wives. Back table." She had misheard. She must have. "Vincent, don't make it a thing." For a moment the room continued around her, the clink of glass, the swell of conversation, the string quartet she had hired playing something precise and unremarkable. She looked at the back table he'd indicated. Elena Marchetti was there, and 2 of the younger wives, and the 2 women who ran the household, who had worked for the family for decades. Domestic staff, loyal, invisible, beneath the sightline of the men who made decisions. He wanted her to sit with the help. 12 years, the chandelier she had chosen, the audit she had buried, the 3 city council votes she had quietly shaped by knowing which alderman's nephew needed a job and which deputy commissioner had a daughter applying to DePaul, and who could be reached through the right charitable foundation at the right moment. The network of relationships she had cultivated like a garden that Vincent walked through every day, assuming it had simply always been there. He wanted her to sit with the help. She felt something shift in her chest, not breaking, that would come later, in private, where she permitted herself to feel things. What she felt now was closer to the specific calm that arrives when a decision that has been forming for a long time finally crystallizes into clarity. She reached up and unclasped the earrings. White gold, 3 carats each. A gift from their 5th anniversary that she had always found ostentatious. She set them beside his bread plate. Then she worked the wedding band from her left hand, the 3-carat solitaire flanked by baguettes, the ring that had been photographed beside his at every public appearance for 12 years, and she placed it precisely, without drama, next to his wine glass. She pushed back her chair. Claire. His voice had changed. She heard it, not concern exactly, more like the surprise of a man who has never once been defied in a room full of witnesses. She stood, smoothed the black dress, picked up her small clutch. Around them, the nearest tables had gone quiet. She was aware of eyes. She didn't care about eyes. "I'll save you the trouble of the arrangement," she said. Calm, level. Quiet enough that only he and Sal Marchetti and 1 or 2 others close enough could hear. "I'll find my own table." She walked across the Romano ballroom across the floor of Spanish marble she had sourced, past the floral arrangements she had approved, past 400 guests who would describe this moment in their own ways for years to come. And she walked through the front door of the mansion into the November air without looking back. The valet brought her car. She drove herself. She didn't cry until she was on the expressway, and even then it lasted less than 2 minutes. She had a plan. She'd had a plan for 18 months, not because she'd expected this exactly, not the public humiliation, not the gala, not the ring left beside the Barolo. She'd had a plan because she was Claire Bennett before she was Claire Romano, and Claire Bennett had grown up in a house where nothing was secure and nothing lasted. And the lesson she had absorbed at a cellular level was that a woman who depends entirely on a man's continued goodwill is a woman living on borrowed time. She had started quietly. A personal account, separate. Not hidden exactly. She was not a dishonest person by nature, but separate, and funded from the consulting work she'd done for 3 of the Romano family's legitimate holding companies, work she had performed and for which she was technically owed compensation that had never been formally discussed. She had formalized it, discreetly, with a lawyer in Evanston who didn't know her married name. The account had grown. She had also been building something else. 18 months of careful, unannounced work. A registered LLC. A business plan. Contacts cultivated over 12 years of being the most competent, invisible person in every room she entered. By the time she reached her sister's apartment in Lincoln Park, the apartment she had called from the expressway, the one where a spare key lived under a ceramic pot on the 3rd-floor landing, she was already composing the first morning's agenda in her head. The ring was on Vincent's table. That chapter was closed. The next one needed to be built fast. Vincent Romano did not sleep that night. He sat in the study of the Kenilworth mansion, the room with the built-in shelves and the leather chairs, and the photographs on the wall of him with men who were either dead or incarcerated. And he drank scotch and told himself the story of what had happened in a way that made him the reasonable party. She had embarrassed him. In front of the Caruzos, in front of the Falcone people, in front of 400 guests. She had made a scene. She had turned a simple, practical request, step back from the table, let the men conduct their business, into a spectacle by being dramatic about it. That was on her. That was her choice. The ring sat on the desk in front of him. He hadn't meant to pick it up. He'd found it in his jacket pocket sometime after midnight, after the guests had gone and the staff had begun to clear, and he'd been sitting with it for 2 hours now, turning it in his fingers. 3 carats. He remembered buying it. He remembered the jeweler in the Gold Coast who had spread the options across velvet and talked about inclusions and clarity grades, and Vincent had pointed to the largest one because he didn't negotiate over jewelry. You wanted the best. You bought the best. That was the end of it. He hadn't asked Claire what she wanted. It hadn't occurred to him. He set the ring on the desk and pushed it away. His phone showed 4 missed calls from Sal and 1 from Dominic. He didn't call back. Whatever tonight's business was, it could wait until morning. He was in no mood. He thought about calling Claire, decided against it. She would come around. She always managed things quietly and came around. That was who she was. He went to bed and slept badly and woke at 5 with the particular unease of a man whose instincts are better than his conscious mind gives them credit for, signaling something he hasn't yet found the language to name. But 3 days passed. She didn't call. She didn't come to the house. He sent one text, "We need to talk. Come home," and received no response. He asked Elena Marchetti if she'd heard from Claire, and Elena looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully read and said she hadn't. On the 4th day, papers arrived via a messenger at the Kenilworth house. Divorce filing. An attorney in Evanston he'd never heard of. Vincent read through the filing twice. It was thorough. The division of assets was itemized in a way that demonstrated an extremely detailed understanding of the Romano family's financial structure. The legitimate side, the holding companies, the real estate portfolio, the restaurant group. Not the other side. She had never touched the other side, and the filing made no reference to it. But the legitimate side was mapped with a precision that told him she had spent considerable time preparing this. He called his own attorney, a man named Gerald Ferris, who had represented Romano family interests for 20 years. Gerald called back in 40 minutes. "Vincent, the Evanston firm is clean, they're very good, and the filing is airtight. She has documentation of her contributions to the legitimate businesses going back 9 years. Consulting agreements, deliverables, communications. It's substantial." What does she want? Fair market value of her documented contributions, plus the standard division. She's not going after anything she can't document. He sat with that. Set up a meeting. She's declined a meeting. Her attorney says she'll communicate through counsel only. That landed differently than the filing had. The filing was legal machinery, and legal machinery could be countered with legal machinery. Declining the meeting was personal. Declining the meeting meant she had nothing left to say to him face to face. He wasn't used to that feeling. He identified it, after a moment, as the unfamiliar sensation of being on the wrong side of a closed door. "Handle it," he said, and hung up and stared at the wall for a long time. Botet. The first sign that something was wrong with the business came 8 days after the gala. A safe house in Bridgeport that the family had used for 2 decades, a property held through 3 layers of shell companies, the address known to fewer than 10 people, was raided by federal agents at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday. Empty. The family had been using it for document storage, legacy records, paper trails from an era before digital became standard. All of it gone. Nobody died. Nobody was arrested. But the message was unambiguous. Vincent called an emergency meeting at the restaurant in Wicker Park that they used for sit-downs. Dominic was there, and Sal, and the 3 capos who needed to know. Nobody had an explanation. The safe house's existence had never been written down anywhere Vincent controlled. "Someone talked," Dominic said. He was leaning back in his chair with the ease of a man who didn't feel personally implicated, and something about that ease pricked at Vincent without coalescing into anything specific. "Find out who," Vincent said. 2 days later, Alderman Robert Pucci, a city council member who had been in the Romano family's pocket for 11 years, announced that he would be declining to seek re-election and cooperating fully with an ongoing federal ethics investigation. His statement was 7 sentences long and said nothing specific, but the word cooperating was there in the second sentence, and it sat like a stone in Vincent's gut. He called the person he normally would have called in a situation involving Pucci, the liaison, the fixer, the relationship manager who had handled the alderman's account for as long as anyone could remember. The number had been disconnected. He tried the backup number. Same. Sal Marchetti, when pressed, admitted that he wasn't sure who exactly had managed the Pucci relationship day to day. He thought it had been someone on Claire's side, something she had set up. Vincent stopped. "What do you mean, Claire's side?" Sal looked uncomfortable. She ran some of the relationship stuff. The city people. I assumed you knew." "How long?" "I don't know. Years, Vincent. I thought you knew." He hadn't known. He was beginning to understand that there were a significant number of things he hadn't known. The financial network started showing fractures in the 3rd week. 3 separate arrangements with local financial institutions. arrangements that managed the movement of money between the family's legitimate revenue streams in ways that required human relationships, the right conversations in the right offices, trust built over time, began to lock up. Calls weren't returned. Meetings were declined. One branch manager whom the family had done business with for 7 years suddenly had a scheduling conflict that kept recurring indefinitely. Vincent's financial people worked the phones for 2 days and came back with nothing. It was Sal who finally said what nobody wanted to say. They were in the back office of the restaurant, just the two of them, and Sal said it without quite meeting Vincent's eyes. These are all people Claire had relationships with. She handled the banking, the relationship side, the human side, the whoever calls when something needs to be smoothed over, when the numbers look a certain way and someone needs to be reassured. That was her. Vincent sat with that. She never told me. You never asked. He looked at Sal. Sal looked at the table. She built it, Sal said. I don't know exactly when or how, but it was her. I've known for a while. I thought you knew. I didn't think it was my place. The word built sat in the room like smoke. Thad. He tried to reach her. He had her cell number, obviously, but she had changed it, or had it forwarded, because the calls connected and rang and went to a voicemail message that was professional, curt, and gave a different number for urgent inquiries. Not her voice. An assistant's voice. He called the Evanston attorney and was told that his calls could be directed to Vincent's own counsel, per the established communication arrangement. He went to the address he had for her sister's apartment in Lincoln Park. He sat in a car on the street for 20 minutes and felt profoundly like an idiot and drove away. He found out through Sal, who found out through Elena, who found out through a friend who worked in commercial real estate. Claire had signed a lease on a commercial space in River North, an office. She had incorporated something called Clearline Security and Logistics, LLC, and she was reportedly hiring. He looked the name up. The LLC was 2 months old, registered in Illinois, 2 named directors, Claire Bennett, the Bennett being her pre-marriage name used formally for the first time in 12 years, and a woman named Dr. Yara Osai, whose LinkedIn described a background in intelligence analysis and risk management. 2 months old. She had started it 2 months before the gala. She had known. Maybe not the specific night, maybe not the specific words he'd say. But she had known something was coming, or she had simply decided that this ending was inevitable, and she had started building the next thing while still showing up to his events in the black dress, still managing his world, still making the phone calls and having the conversations, and keeping the lights on in the empire he'd built, or thought he'd built. Claire's first 3 clients came through referrals from people she had known in her previous life. Not the crime family life, the legitimate world life, the one that had run parallel to the Romano family business through every year of her marriage, the one that most people in Vincent's circle hadn't noticed because they weren't paying attention to what she did between events. She brought Dr. Yara Ose in first. She had met Yara 3 years ago through a risk consulting firm that did work for 2 of the Romano holding companies, and they had stayed in contact because Yara was the most operationally intelligent person Claire had encountered in a decade of working environments where intelligence was either raw muscle or raw cunning, and the analytical kind was severely undervalued. Yara was 42, Nigerian-American, former DIA analyst, and ran her own small consulting operation out of a shared office space downtown. When Claire called her with the proposal, Yara asked 3 questions, then said yes. The first client was a mid-sized logistics company out of Schaumburg that needed a security audit and supply chain vulnerability assessment. Claire had been introduced to its CEO 18 months earlier at a function she'd attended on Vincent's behalf and had followed up twice via email since then, keeping the relationship warm without a specific agenda. She called now with a specific agenda. The second client was a city department that needed assistance with sensitive personnel transitions. This one came through a deputy commissioner whom Claire had quietly helped navigate a difficult interdepartmental situation 2 years prior. He remembered. He called her. The third was referred by the second. By the end of November, 22 days after the gala, Clearline had 3 paying engagements, a 6-month lease on a 4-office suite in River North, and a staff of 4, including Yara, a former Secret Service logistics coordinator named Marcus Webb, and two analysts fresh out of graduate programs who were astonishingly good and significantly underpaid by the corporate market, which was exactly what a startup needed. Claire worked 12-hour days and felt, for the first time in years, that the energy she was spending was returning something to her rather than simply evaporating into the machinery of someone else's ambitions. She filed the divorce papers on a Tuesday morning and didn't mark the occasion in any way. She had work to do. The first call from Dominic Vega came in late November. He reached her through a mutual contact, someone from the old world who still had her original number, and left a message. Friendly, casual, just checking in, hope you're well, times are complicated, maybe they could get coffee. She didn't return the call. The second call came 4 days later, this time from a different number, and she recognized his voice in the first 3 words and ended the call. She mentioned it to Marcus Webb, who had the face of a man who had spent 15 years in protective services and had learned to show nothing in his expressions. He made a note of the numbers and said he'd be aware. She didn't mention it to anyone else. Dominic Vega was a problem that belonged to the old world, and she was building the new one. The week before Christmas, Vincent's world contracted sharply. 2 of his capos, men who had been with the family for a combined 30 years, missed a scheduled meeting. One was subsequently found to have taken an unannounced trip to visit family in Miami. The other was unreachable for 36 hours before surfacing with a story about a family health emergency that didn't check out. Neither of these things, alone, would have meant anything. Together, in the context of everything else that was falling apart, they had a specific smell that Vincent had encountered before in 30 years of this life. It was the smell of rats reading the weather and making adjustments. He sat in the Kenilworth study, the room where he'd spent the night after the gala, and for the first time in recent memory he felt the grip of something close to fear. Not of dying. He had made peace with dying in a general sense long ago, in the way men in his business had to or they couldn't function. What he felt was the specific fear of being stupid, of having been stupid, of looking back at a year of his life and finding that he had been walked around like a piece on a board by people he had trusted, while the one person who actually understood the whole board had been sitting next to him at the head table, and he had told her to go sit with the help. He picked up his phone and called Dominic. "We need to meet," he said. "Of course," Dominic said. "Tomorrow morning, I'll come to you." The ease of it. The immediate, smooth accommodation. Vincent sat with that ease for a long time after he hung up, turning it over the way he'd turned Claire's ring in his fingers, looking for what it meant. Bassam. She heard about the Bridgeport raid from Marcus, who had contacts in federal circles from his Secret Service years. She heard about Poochie from the news. She heard about the banking fractures from one of her new clients, whose own relationship with a financial institution had been unexpectedly affected by shifting alliances she didn't fully understand. She didn't reach out to Vincent. That wasn't her problem to solve. She thought about the people who worked the legitimate businesses, the restaurant staff, the event coordinators, the property managers of buildings the family owned through legitimate holding structures, buildings where actual people rented apartments and paid rent and needed maintenance responses. Those people were real, and they were not responsible for what was happening in the structure above them. She made calls, not to Vincent, to managers, to HR people she'd worked with, to a benefits administrator she'd helped navigate a compliance issue 2 years prior. She gathered information about the current state of each operation. She made notes. She didn't know yet exactly what she was gathering the information for, but she had learned to trust the instinct that told her to gather it. Yara, walking past her office late on a Thursday afternoon, stopped in the doorway and looked at the notes spread across Claire's desk. "Romano exposure?" she asked. "Research." Yara leaned against the doorframe. "You know that whatever's happening over there is going to land in a way that affects the legitimate operations." "I know." "And you're thinking about the people who work those operations." "I'm thinking about a lot of things." "Claire." Yara's voice shifted just slightly. "You know you're not responsible for whatever happens to his organization." "I know that too. But knowing it and being able to watch innocent people get dragged into the wreckage are 2 different things." Yara was quiet for a moment. "So what do we do?" Claire looked at her notes. "We keep gathering information, and we stay ready." "And?" The meeting with Dominic happened on a Wednesday morning at the Kenilworth house. Just the two of them, which was Vincent's choice. He wanted no audience for this conversation until he understood what the conversation was. Dominic arrived with the ease that always characterized him. Good coat, strong handshake, the focused attention of someone who wanted you to feel heard. Vincent had always valued that quality. He was beginning to re-examine every quality he had valued in Dominic. They sat in the study. Vincent had not offered coffee. "The Bridgeport property," Vincent said. "Terrible situation. Still working on where the breach came from." "Poochie." "I heard." "That's a shock." "Is it?" Dominic looked at him steadily. "What are you asking me, Vincent?" "I'm asking you if you've got a theory. You're the underboss. You handle intel. Where are we on finding the breach?" "I have some leads I'm running down." Smooth, patient. "Give me another week." "The banking situation." "I know. I've been making calls." Those were relationships Claire maintained. Something moved across Dominic's face. Vincent watched it carefully. It wasn't guilt. It was more calculated than guilt. It was the micro-expression of someone who had just checked a variable and found it where they expected. "Claire built good relationships," Dominic said. "It's unfortunate that her departure has... Her departure. Her leaving, I mean." "She didn't leave," Vincent said. "I told her to move tables and she walked out and filed for divorce. That's not a departure. That's a response to a specific action." Dominic sat with that. "I understand. It was a difficult night." "I've been thinking about that night," Vincent said. "I've been thinking about what put me in the mood I was in that night. What information I had going into that gala that made me feel like Claire was a liability, a distraction." He paused. "Who talked to me in the weeks before the gala, Dominic?" The room went quiet. Outside, a car passed on the street. "I'm not sure what you're asking," Dominic said. "I think you are." Another pause. Dominic's ease was still present, but it had changed quality slightly, the way ice on a lake changes quality when the temperature shifts. It looked the same, but you tested it differently. "There were concerns from several people about Claire having access to, what people?" "I was trying to protect the family." "What people?" Dominic stopped. He looked at Vincent with an expression that was assembling itself into something new, and Vincent recognized it because he had seen it in mirrors and in the faces of men at tables like this one for 30 years. It was the expression of someone deciding how much of the truth to give away and what to withhold, calculating in real time whether the cover story was still serviceable. "We should talk about this with the full team present," Dominic said. "No," Vincent said. "We should talk about it right now." What happened in the next 40 minutes did not resolve anything. Dominic was too skilled, too careful, and had clearly spent considerable time constructing a version of events that positioned his actions as protective rather than predatory. He talked about concerns, about vulnerabilities, about the risk of a civilian having too much access to family intelligence. He used words like exposure and liability and structure. He never used words like forged or planted or coup. But he also never fully answered the question of what people, and he never produced the actual evidence he had allegedly shown Vincent in those pre-gala conversations. And by the end of the 40 minutes, Vincent had confirmed, at the level of bone-deep certainty rather than provable fact, what was happening. He walked Dominic to the door with the same face he'd worn at the start and said he'd be in touch. He closed the door and stood in the hallway for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. He didn't call his lawyer. He didn't call Sal. He called a number that he had not called in 6 years, a number belonging to a man he had burned a significant amount of goodwill to maintain in a state of mutual non-aggression, a man whose information network covered this city the way water covered a floor. Into every crack, through every door, completely and silently. The man picked up on the second ring. "Vincent," he said, "I was wondering when you'd call." "I need information," Vincent said, "about Dominic Vega, everything you have, and I need to know if there's movement, if something is being planned." A pause. "There's been movement for about 2 months." The floor tilted slightly under Vincent's feet. He kept his voice even. "How serious?" "The Detroit people are involved. The New Jersey delegation that was at your gala, and some people I don't recognize. Outside talent. Brought in recently. Outside talent. The phrase meant one specific thing in this world. When? Vincent said. My read? Soon. They waited to see if Claire would come back and stabilize things. When she didn't, they read it as weakness. They read it as the right moment. Vincent hung up and stood in the hallway of the house that he had built. The house full of things Claire had chosen, in the city where every useful relationship he had was either one she had maintained or one that was currently in the process of evaporating, and he felt the full weight of what he had done land on him at once. Not as guilt, exactly, but as the specific, brutal clarity of consequence. He had been manipulated. And he had been manipulable because he had never once, in 12 years, bothered to ask his wife what she actually did. He needed to talk to Claire. He had no idea if she would talk to him. He reached for his phone, and in that moment it buzzed with an incoming call from a number he didn't recognize. And when he answered it, a voice he didn't know said, Mr. Romano, you should know that your River North restaurant was just firebombed. No casualties, building is burning. And Mr. Vega's car was parked 2 blocks away 20 minutes before it happened. The line went dead. Vincent was already moving toward the door when his phone erupted with calls. Sal, then a capo, then 2 numbers he didn't recognize. All of them at once. The network lighting up the way it only lit up when something had Vincent Romano drove to the River North restaurant himself. He knew it was stupid. He knew the smart move was to stay in Kenilworth, make calls, run the response from a distance the way a man in his position was supposed to operate. But there was something in him that couldn't absorb this from a phone screen. Couldn't take firebombed as an abstraction when what it meant was a building he had eaten in 1,000 times, a kitchen where a chef named Roberto had worked for 19 years and knew how Vincent took his coffee without being asked. He was 3 blocks away when the smoke became visible against the December sky. Black and thick, the kind of smoke that meant accelerant. This wasn't a kitchen fire. This was a message written in fire, and it had been written deliberately, which meant someone had made the decision to write it, which meant the thing he'd been feeling in his chest for the past 3 weeks, that low tectonic wrongness, had finally broken the surface. He parked on a side street and got out of the car and stood looking at the smoke for a moment. His phone had stopped ringing. He'd silenced it 2 blocks back because he couldn't think with it going. Sal Marchetti appeared at his elbow from nowhere, which meant Sal had also driven here himself instead of staying somewhere sensible. Roberto got everyone out, Sal said. Staff, kitchen, everybody. Nobody's hurt. The building. Ground floor is gone. Upper 2 might be salvageable. Vincent watched the fire for another moment. 3 fire trucks were present. Police had blocked the street. A small crowd gathered at the perimeter tape, the way crowds always gathered, that human compulsion toward witness disaster. Vega's car, Vincent said, 2 blocks north. Confirmed. A camera on an ATM caught it at 7:14. Fire was called in at 7:39. He drove away before it went up. Yes. Vincent turned away from the fire. Looking at it wasn't going to tell him anything he didn't already know. Where is he now? Not answering. Find him. Vincent? Sal's voice had a specific quality he only used when he was about to say something that required courage. If we move on Dominic directly, it escalates. If he's already got the Detroit people in New Jersey behind him, moving on him alone just, I know. So what do we do? Vincent looked at his phone. He had the Evanston attorney's number. He had the communication through counsel arrangement. He had no direct line to Claire and hadn't had one since November. I need to talk to Claire, he said. Sal was quiet for a moment. She's not going to I know, set it up anyway. Go through Elena, go through whoever, but set it up. Tell her I need an hour. Tell her it's not about us. He paused. Tell her people might get hurt. The message reached Claire at 8:47 in the evening through Elena Marchetti, who called on a personal number and sounded like someone delivering news across a minefield. He wants an hour, Elena said. He says it's not about reconciling. He says people might get hurt. Claire was at her desk in the River North office, which she had stayed late at, partly because there was work to do, and partly because she'd seen the smoke from the restaurant on a news alert and had been sitting with a specific cold feeling in her stomach ever since. She looked at Yara, who was standing in the doorway again. Yara had seen the news alert too. "Tell him tomorrow morning," Claire said. 8 o'clock. Clear Line's office. He comes alone. She hung up and looked at Yara. "You sure about that?" Yara said. "No," Claire said. "But I know what that fire means, and I know who's behind it, and I know that whatever Dominic Vega is planning involves more than just Vincent's organization." Yara came fully into the office and sat down. "Walk me through it." "Dominic's been building for 2 months at minimum. The Detroit people, the New Jersey delegation, those are families, Yara. That's not a coup. That's a restructuring. And a restructuring of that size doesn't stay contained to one organization. The legitimate businesses are in the middle of it. Real estate, restaurant group, 3 logistics contracts that other companies depend on. Hundreds of people. So we protect the assets. We protect the people attached to the assets. There's a difference." Claire closed the folder she'd been working from. "I need you to pull everything we have on the legitimate holdings. Every employee count, every contractual dependency, every financial relationship that touches a real person's livelihood. I want it mapped by morning." Yara didn't move immediately. "Claire, you know that helping him, even the legitimate side, is going to look like—" "It's not help," Claire said. "It's containment. And yes, I know how it looks. I know what people will say." She met Yara's eyes. "I'm doing it anyway," Cheb. Vincent showed up at 7:58. He was alone, as instructed. He wore a coat she didn't recognize, charcoal wool, good quality, the kind of thing she had always bought for him, and now apparently he was buying for himself or having someone buy. The observation arrived and departed without sentiment. She noted it the way she noted everything, as information. Marcus Webb led him into the building. The River North office was not yet fully furnished. The lease was 6 weeks old. The furniture was functional rather than impressive. The walls were bare except for a whiteboard covered in her handwriting that she hadn't bothered to erase. She saw his eyes move across it. She didn't move to cover it. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She remained standing because standing felt correct. He looked around the office once more, taking inventory, and she watched him do it and knew what he was doing, trying to read the operation, assess the scale, understand what she'd built. She let him look. "You started this before the gala," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It sounded like a man reading an equation and arriving at the answer with some difficulty. 2 months before. "Because you knew. Because I'm careful." He absorbed that. Then, "Dominic has been building a coalition. Detroit, the Falcone people from New Jersey. There's outside talent, hired people, not family. The fire last night was the opening move." "I know." He looked at her. "How?" "Because I've been watching the same thing you've been watching, Vincent, except I started earlier." She pulled a chair out from the conference table and sat, because standing over him was a posture that belonged to a different version of this conversation, and this was not that conversation. "I know about the safe house. I know about Poochie. I made sure Poochie's decision came from a place of genuine self-interest rather than pressure from your side, which was the only way to make it stick. I know about the financial network because I built the financial network, and I've been quietly reinforcing the connections that matter most so that when everything else collapses, the legitimate businesses survive." The silence lasted 4 full seconds. "You were protecting the businesses," he said, "after you left." "I was protecting the people who work in the businesses. There's a difference, and I need you to understand it before we go any further. Roberto, the kitchen staff. Roberto and 63 other employees across the restaurant group alone, plus the property management staff, the logistics contractors, I know how many people work for me. Do you?" She said it without heat, flat, a question that was also a statement. "Because 6 weeks ago you couldn't have told me who managed the Poochie relationship, or which bank officer handled the Dearborn property account, or what the payroll cycle was for the Wicker Park location." He didn't answer, which was, itself, an answer. "I'm not saying that to hurt you," she said. "I'm saying it because you need to understand what we're actually dealing with. Dominic didn't just target you, he targeted the structure. And the structure includes real people whose lives get destroyed if those businesses collapse. What do you need from me? Vincent said. She had prepared for several versions of this meeting. She had not fully prepared for him to say that, in that tone, with that economy. No argument, no negotiation, just the question. Information, she said. Current location of Dominic's key people. The outside talent, who they are, where they're staging, timeline if you have any read on it. And in return, nothing. This isn't a transaction. She held his eyes. I'm not coming back to you, Vincent. I'm not renegotiating the divorce. I'm not reconsidering the filing. I'm not interested in whatever version of an apology you've been rehearsing. That is not what this is. Something moved in his face. She watched it happen. The specific expression of a man absorbing a sentence that removes a possibility he'd been keeping alive without fully acknowledging it. Okay, he said, then give me what you have. He talked for 40 minutes. She took notes in her own shorthand, the system she'd developed over 12 years of meetings she wasn't supposed to be in. He was thorough, she gave him that. When he knew something, he said it clearly, and when he was speculating, he flagged it as speculation, which was more epistemic discipline than she had generally credited him with. By the end, she had a solid operational picture of what Dominic had assembled, and a rough timeline that suggested the next move was coming within days. When he finished, he sat back and looked at her notes the way he'd looked at the whiteboard when he arrived. You're going to give this to federal contacts. To a specific federal contact who understands the boundaries of what I'm providing and why. Yes. That burns Dominic without anyone having to make a choice they can't take back. Yes. She capped her pen. It also burns the Detroit connection and the New Jersey involvement, which means this doesn't just stop here, it stops the pattern. Claire. His voice had changed. Something underneath the operational surface of the conversation was pushing up. I need you to know that I understand what I cost you, Vincent. She said it gently, but without yield. Not now, maybe not ever, but certainly not now. She stood. I'll be in touch through my attorney about next steps on the federal piece. Your job until then is to not do anything that makes the situation worse. Can you do that? He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood, picked up his coat, and said, There's one more thing. Tell me. Dominic knows about this office. He has a contact in the building management. I found out last night. He knows you've been active since November, and he's flagged you as a variable. The word variable landed with specific weight. In Dominic Vega's vocabulary, a variable was something that needed to be resolved. How solid is that information? She said. Solid enough that I sat outside on the street for 20 minutes before I came in, looking for anyone who shouldn't be here. She looked at him. He looked back. Marcus, she called. Marcus Webb appeared in the doorway with the promptness of someone who had been listening from 3 feet away, which he had. We heard, Marcus said. He was already on his phone. I'll sweep the exterior and call a contact at CPD. We should consider relocating for the next 72 hours. Do it, Claire said. She looked back at Vincent. Thank you for telling me. He nodded. Then he walked out of her office, through the barely furnished reception area, past the bare walls and the functional furniture, and the whiteboard covered in the handwriting of a woman who had rebuilt herself from scratch in 6 weeks. She listened to his footsteps cross the floor and the door close behind him. She sat back down and looked at her notes. She had perhaps 72 hours before Dominic Vega decided she was enough of a threat to warrant direct action. She had a federal contact she could call, a woman named Supervisory Special Agent Dana Reyes, whom she'd been cultivating cautiously since the previous spring through channels that were completely legitimate and completely deniable as anything more than professional relationship building. She had Marcus Webb, and she had Yara, and she had 4 employees she needed to protect. She also had the most complete intelligence picture of Dominic Vega's operation that anyone outside his own circle currently possessed. She pulled out her personal cell, not the business line, the one only 4 people had the number to, and called Dana Reyes. Reyes picked up on the 3rd ring. Claire? I need to meet. Today, not tomorrow. A pause. That's serious. That's serious. 2 o'clock, the coffee place on Wabash we used last time. I'll be there. She hung up and looked at Yara, who had materialized in the doorway again. Federal contact, Yara said. 2 o'clock. And Dominic knowing about this office. We're moving. Today. I need you to find us temporary space, somewhere that isn't in any database connected to my name or Clearline's registered address. Use your consulting firm's address as the search contact. Yara was already on her tablet. I have a space in the West Loop that a colleague uses for sensitive client meetings. Clean, private, no public registry connection. Book it for a week. Done. Yara looked up. Claire, the thing he told you, about Dominic flagging you as a variable. I know. That means we're in this now. We're not just protecting assets from a distance. We're inside the situation. I know that too. And you still want to move forward. Claire looked at her. The alternative is walking away and watching people I spent years working with get destroyed by a man who lit a restaurant on fire as an opening move. She picked up her coat. What would you do? Yara was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll get the car. Well, son. The meeting with Dana Reyes lasted 90 minutes. Dana was 45, compact, with the specific kind of patience that federal work either built or destroyed depending on the person. And in Dana, it had built patience that could sit across a table from anyone and wait as long as was necessary. She and Claire had met through a legitimate security conference 18 months prior and had stayed in cautious contact, each of them understanding what the other represented, neither of them pushing the relationship toward utility before the time was right. The time was right. Claire laid out what she had. Not everything. She was careful about the lines between what was observable from the legitimate business side and what came from her conversation with Vincent, framing the latter as information she had received through an intermediary without specifying who. Dana was experienced enough not to press on that. What Claire gave her was enough. The coalition structure, the timeline, the identity of the outside talent, two names she had pulled from a cross-reference of security databases she had legitimate access to through Clearline. The financial routing she had observed as the person who had previously managed those routes. Dana listened. She asked precise questions. She took no notes on paper, but Claire had no illusions that the conversation wasn't being retained by other means. If this moves the way you're describing, Dana said, we're looking at a RICO situation across 3 states. Yes. The timing is tight. I know. I think you have 48 hours, maybe less. Dana looked at her coffee cup. You understand what your exposure looks like here. I'm a private security consultant who received credible intelligence about an imminent organized crime action affecting legitimate businesses and civilian safety. I'm reporting it through appropriate channels. That's a clean description. It's an accurate one. Dana looked up at her. The Romano connection. I was married to Vincent Romano. I have never been party to criminal activity. My work was confined entirely to the legitimate business operations, which is documentable. She met Dana's eyes. I'm not asking for protection. I'm giving you actionable intelligence because people will get hurt if I don't. What you do with it is your business. Dana was quiet for a moment, then she nodded. I'll make a call. Claire stood. I need something in return. I thought you said, not for me. The people who work the legitimate Romano businesses. Restaurant staff, property management, logistics contractors. When this lands, I need someone who understands the difference between the organization and its civilian employees. Dana studied her. I'll see what I can do. That's all I'm asking. Claire walked out of the coffee shop onto Wabash, and the December wind hit her immediately. Lake wind, the kind that had no patience for anyone who wasn't dressed for it. She pulled her coat tighter and walked to where Yara had the car idling at the curb. She got in. Yara pulled into traffic without asking how it went, which was why Claire trusted her. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. He knows you met with someone today. Move tonight, not tomorrow. She stared at the text. Unknown number, but the cadence of it, the stripped-down urgency, the specific information, told her it came from someone inside Dominic's circle who had decided to be somewhere else when the consequence landed. Yara, she said. I see it, Yara said, which meant she'd been looking at the same text via the mirroring setup Marcus had configured on the team's secure system. West Loop space is ready. Marcus is already there. Call him. Full lockdown protocol. Already calling. The car moved through Chicago traffic, the city doing what it always did. Indifferent, enormous, ongoing. While somewhere in it, Dominic Vega was looking at his own intelligence picture and making his own calculations. And the window between what Claire knew and what he was willing to do about it was... The West Loop space was a fourth-floor suite in a building that housed an architecture firm and 2 legal practices, the kind of address that looked like nothing from the street, and that was exactly why Yara's colleague used it. Marcus Webb had arrived 40 minutes ahead of them and had done what Marcus Webb did in new spaces. Walked every room, tested every exit, identified the 2 points of vulnerability, and addressed them with the quiet efficiency of someone for whom security assessment was less a skill than a reflex. By the time Claire and Yara came through the door, he had a secure perimeter, a working coffee setup, and a look on his face that said the text message she'd received in the car had accelerated his personal threat assessment considerably. Talk to me, Claire said, dropping her bag on the conference table. Building has 2 exits, both covered by cameras I can't control, which is a liability, but the cameras belong to the building management system, and they're not being monitored in real time, recorded only. Ground floor has a loading dock on the west side that isn't on the public building map. He paused. Dominic Vega has at least one person who works federal adjacent, not a Fed, someone who has access to business registration databases. He found Clearline. The registered address, yes. River North is already being watched. I had someone drive past 20 minutes ago. 2 vehicles rotating. They're not hiding it. They're not trying to hide it, Claire said. They want us to know we're being watched. It's pressure. Pressure toward what? She set her coat over a chair and sat. The text message. He knows you met with someone today. Move tonight, not tomorrow, was still on her phone screen. She set it face down on the table. Toward a mistake. Toward me doing something reactive that gives him justification or gives him access. She looked at Marcus. He wants me in the open. So we stay closed. For now. She turned to Yara. The intelligence I gave Dana Reyes, how long does federal activation take from a call like that? Depends on how much pre-existing file they have on the principals. If Dominic Vega is already a known entity, he is. He's been on the periphery of 3 separate investigations over 7 years, none of which resulted in charges. She had learned this through the kind of quiet, patient research that nobody in the Romano world had ever thought to do because nobody in the Romano world thought research was a weapon. They have a file. The question is whether my information is enough to move it from surveillance to action. 48 hours was your estimate, Yara said. My estimate was optimistic. Claire looked at her hands on the table. The text changed the timeline. If Dominic knows I met with someone federal adjacent, he has 2 options. Wait and see if the meeting produces visible consequences, or accelerate before it can. He accelerates, Marcus said. He wasn't guessing. It was the same read she had. He accelerates, she confirmed, which means we have less than 48 hours, possibly significantly less. The room went quiet. Outside, traffic on the West Loop streets moved with its usual indifference. Somewhere across the city, a man was recalibrating. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered it. Ms. Bennett. A voice she didn't recognize. Male, middle-aged, deliberate. My name isn't important. What's important is that I work for the same person who sent you the text message an hour ago, and I need you to understand something that your federal contact does not yet know. She put the call on speaker without breaking her expression. Marcus moved closer. Go ahead, she said. The documents that Dominic Vega used to manipulate Vincent Romano before the gala. The evidence he claimed demonstrated that Claire Romano was a liability, a security risk, that she had been sharing family intelligence with outside parties. A pause. Those documents were not entirely fabricated. The room temperature seemed to drop. Explain that, she said. Her voice was level, her hands were not. One of the documents was real. A meeting record. You met with a city procurement officer named James Calloway in March of last year. The meeting was legitimate. You were managing a contract renewal for one of the holding companies. But Callaway has a secondary relationship with a Vega associate, and the meeting was documented in a way that made it look like an intelligence handoff. Another pause. Vega didn't entirely manufacture the case against you. He found one real thread and wove fiction around it until it looked like a pattern. She sat with that. One real thread. One meeting she had taken in good faith, documented by someone in the room she hadn't known was there, repurposed into something that looked like betrayal. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because if the federal case moves forward on the intelligence you provided today, Dominic's lawyers will surface that document. And when they surface it, your credibility as a source gets destroyed. The case doesn't stick. Dominic walks. And then he has no reason left to be subtle about what he does next." The line went dead. She put the phone down on the table. She could hear her own breathing, steady, slow, the breathing she had trained herself to produce in moments when everything wanted to speed up. "Claire," Yara said, "I heard it." "One real document changes, it changes everything," she said. "I know." She stood up and walked to the window. The West Loop outside looked exactly the same as it had 30 seconds ago. Same traffic, same buildings, same December light going gray at the edges. Dana Reyes moves forward on what I gave her. Dominic surfaces the Callaway meeting record, and suddenly the star witness is a woman with documented contact with a Vega associate 9 months ago. The case collapses, Dominic gets ahead of it, and She stopped. "I'm not just discredited. I'm implicated." "You didn't do anything wrong," Marcus said. "I know that. It doesn't matter what I know." She turned from the window. The calculation was already running in her head, the way calculations always ran, not frantically, not with the scattered energy of panic, but with the cold sequential logic that had been her actual operating system for 12 years. She just hadn't let anyone see it until now. "I need to call Dana Reyes and pull back the intelligence briefing," she said. "If you pull back," Yara started. "If I pull back now, before Dominic surfaces the Callaway document, I control the narrative. I contacted her with information I subsequently determined was incomplete. That's a setback, not a scandal." She picked up her phone. "If I don't pull back and he surfaces it in the middle of a federal action, we lose everything and I spend the next 2 years in a deposition chair." "The people in the businesses," Marcus said. He meant it as a reminder, not a rebuke. He meant pulling back means no federal action, which means no protection for the legitimate employees. She felt that land. She let herself feel it, the specific weight of it, the faces she put to it. Roberto in the kitchen she had visited twice a year for 11 years. The property managers who sent her updates she had read carefully and responded to. The logistics staff who had trusted the stability of their contracts because she had quietly ensured that stability. "I know," she said. "I know." She called Dana Reyes. The conversation with Dana was 7 minutes long, and the most controlled 7 minutes of Claire's recent memory. She laid out the new information without identifying its source, framing it as a due diligence issue she'd discovered after their meeting. Dana listened with the patience of someone who had been in this business long enough to recognize that intelligence had a half-life, and sources had complications, and the version you received in a coffee shop was rarely the complete version. "You're pulling the briefing," Dana said. It wasn't a question. "I'm flagging the complication. What you do with the rest of the information is your judgment. I'm not in a position to be your primary source on this." A pause. "Is this pressure?" From his side. "It's a complication I discovered on my own that changes my reliability as a source. That's all I'm telling you." Another pause, longer. "Claire, if something happens to civilians in the next 48 hours because this didn't move forward..." "I know." She said it with the same flatness she'd been using all day, the flatness that was not coldness, but the thin surface over a significant amount of heat. "I know exactly what I'm carrying. Thank you for the meeting." She ended the call and sat back down at the conference table and put both hands flat on its surface and looked at them. "Now what?" Marcus said. "Now we go back to the beginning. Without federal cover, without the Romano organization's resources, and with Dominic Vega aware that I've been active." She looked up. "We have the intelligence picture. We have the timeline. We have the financial routing documentation. What we need is a way to use it that doesn't go through me as the primary source. A secondary source, Yara said. Someone inside Dominic's operation who can be the face of this rather than me. She looked at the phone on the table, the one that had received the anonymous texts. Someone who is already nervous enough to have been sending messages. You want to find the anonymous contact. I want to give the anonymous contact a reason to go from text messages to a recorded statement. Yara looked at her for a moment. That's a significant escalation in their risk profile. Yes, which means we need to offer them something sufficient. She thought about it. Who benefits most from Dominic Vega's fall who is currently inside his operation? Everyone below him, Marcus said. If he takes the organization in the direction he's taking it, consolidation with Detroit and New Jersey means Chicago loses its independent structure. Every local player under Dominic becomes a subordinate to a multi-state organization instead of a player in their own right. So his own people lose power if he succeeds. The ones with enough position to care, yes. She looked at the phone again. Then find me a name. Someone in Dominic's circle with enough to lose and enough position to have sent those messages. Marcus had been working his own network quietly throughout this conversation. She could see it in the intervals between his contributions, the way his eyes went slightly distant. He had contacts she didn't ask about in detail because the detail wasn't always useful to know. I have one name that fits, Paul Ferretti, Dominic's consigliere. Been with the Chicago operation for 20 years. If Dominic merges into a Detroit-controlled structure, Ferretti loses his position. He'd be a mid-level soldier in a large organization instead of a senior advisor in a tight one. Does Ferretti have a way out? He has a brother in Phoenix who runs legitimate construction, clean, no family connection. So he has something to run to. She stood. I need a number for Ferretti. Claire. Marcus said her name with the weight of a complete sentence. I know what you're going to say. If you contact Ferretti directly, you're making yourself visible to Dominic's entire network, not just his watchers, everyone. I know. And if Ferretti isn't the one who sent those messages, if this is a play by Dominic to draw you out, I know that too. She held Marcus's eyes. What's the alternative, Marcus? We sit in this room and wait for Dominic to make his next move while the people in those businesses have no protection at all? He didn't answer, because there wasn't an answer to that. Get me Ferretti's number, she said. She called from a burner. Marcus had two, kept for situations he described as elevated, which was as close to dramatic language as he ever permitted himself. Ferretti picked up on the fifth ring. She heard background noise, a television, the particular environment of a man at home in the early evening. Mr. Ferretti, she said, my name is Claire Bennett. I think you've been trying to talk to me. A very long silence. Then the sound of a television going mute. How did you get this number? He said. The same way I get most things, carefully. She kept her voice neutral, conversational. I'm not calling to threaten you. I'm calling because I think you understand what Dominic's plan means for your situation, and I think you sent me those messages because you're looking for a way through. Another silence. She let it sit. She was good at silence. She had spent 12 years in rooms where the wrong word was worse than no word. I don't know what messages you're talking about, Ferretti said. Okay, she said. Then I'll tell you what I know without reference to messages. Dominic is 24 to 48 hours from a move that ends the independent Chicago structure. The Detroit and New Jersey people get what they came for. You lose your position, your autonomy, and the thing you've spent 20 years building. Your brother's Phoenix operation becomes interesting to people who know about it. She paused. Or there's another version, where Dominic's plan is documented and prosecuted and the Chicago structure survives in some form, and a person who helped make that happen has a reasonable basis to step away cleanly. She could hear his breathing. Even over the phone, even through the distortion of a burner call, she could hear what was happening in his chest. What would it take? He said finally. Low. barely above a murmur. A recorded statement. Specific dates, specific meetings, the financial routing, the forged documents used to manipulate Vincent Romano, where they came from, who produced them. She paused. And the location of the outside talent, where they're staged, what the specific plan is. If I do that, I know what you are. That's why I'm offering the Phoenix option. She said it calmly. Your brother's business doesn't come into any of this. You disappear to Phoenix before the federal action moves, and you stay there. The statement is your ticket. A very long silence. She counted her own heartbeats. 12, 13. The outside talent is staged at a warehouse in Pilsen, Ferretti said. I can get you an address. She exhaled through her nose carefully so he wouldn't hear it. Good. Tell me the rest. He talked for 22 minutes. By the end, she had an address in Pilsen, the names of 3 outside operators with enough prior record that a federal database cross-match would confirm their history immediately, a specific description of what Dominic had planned for Vincent. Not just the organization, but Vincent personally, the kind of ending that was meant to be visible and declarative, the kind that sent a message to every remaining independent structure in the region, and the name of the document forger who had produced the materials used to poison Vincent's mind before the gala. She also had something she hadn't anticipated, confirmation that the Callaway meeting record, the one real thread in Dominic's fabricated case against her, had been obtained not through surveillance but through a plant. A woman at the procurement meeting who worked for a Vega associate and had been placed in Callaway's office 8 months earlier specifically to document anyone from the Romano legitimate network who came through that door. She had been targeted. The meeting had been a setup she'd had no reason to suspect. She had walked into a room 9 months ago and been photographed without knowing it, and the photograph had been used to take her life apart, slowly, over the months that followed. She sat with that after Ferretti's call ended. She sat with the specific, disorienting experience of understanding that the ending of her marriage, the gala, the ring on the table, the walk across the floor of Spanish marble, had been engineered. Not by her husband's cruelty, exactly. By someone who had seen her clearly enough to know she was the load-bearing wall and had manufactured the reasons to tear her out. She didn't feel grief about it. She thought she might later. Right now, what she felt was something colder and more functional. The focused anger of someone who has been played and is now in full possession of the board. Yara, she said. Yara was already typing. Pilsen address is checking out. Industrial zoning, warehouse complex, 3 registered businesses at that address, all of which are shell entities. She looked up. This is real. Call Dana Reyes, Claire said. Tell her I have a new source with a recorded statement and a specific address. And the Callaway meeting complication has been resolved. She stood. Tell her she has about 4 hours. And the Callaway document. Ferretti gave me the forger's name. I'm going to give it to Gerald Ferris, Vincent's attorney. Gerald can put it in front of a judge as part of the divorce proceeding, on record, which means it enters the legal system through a channel that has nothing to do with me or the federal case. She thought through the chain. By the time Dominic's lawyers try to surface it, it's already been categorized as a fraudulent document in a separate proceeding. You worked that out while he was talking, Yara said. I worked that out on the way here from the coffee shop, Claire said. I've been waiting for the forger's name. Yara looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not quite admiration and not quite concern, but something that contained elements of both. Claire, after this lands, the federal action, Dominic, all of it, you understand that every person in that world is going to know your name. They already know my name. They've known it for 12 years. They just thought it was someone else's name. She picked up her coat. I'm calling Gerald Ferris. You call Dana Reyes. Marcus. Already mapped the route from here to 3 separate locations we can move to if we need to in the next 4 hours, Marcus said. Good. She looked at both of them. Whatever happens tonight, the people in those businesses don't get dragged into it. That's the condition. That's why we're doing this. She went into the small interior office and called Gerald Ferris and gave him the forger's name and a brief, precise description of the chain of documentation he needed to put in front of a judge in the morning. Gerald, to his credit, asked exactly 2 questions and then said he'd have a filing ready by 9 a.m. She hung up and looked at the window of the interior office. It faced an air shaft. No view, just brick. She stood there for a moment in the quiet. She had started this morning with a plan that had a federal component, a source problem, a timeline, and a margin of safety. She now had a federal component that was back on track, a source problem that was resolved, a timeline of 4 hours, and a margin of safety that was approximately 0. What she also had, underneath all of that, was the knowledge that Dominic Vega had seen her clearly enough to know she was the most dangerous person in the Romano structure, and had spent 2 months engineering her removal before moving against Vincent. He had understood what Vincent had not. He had understood that she was the foundation. He had been right, and removing her had worked for almost 2 months. It was no longer working. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Ferretti's car just left his house, heading north. He's moving. Phoenix. He was already heading for the highway. Good. She had what she needed from him, and the last thing she wanted was Paul Ferretti deciding to renegotiate or panic. She texted back, "Let him go." Then a second buzz. This one from a number she recognized. Vincent's new personal cell, the one he'd used for the single meeting this morning. The text was 4 words. Dominic is moving early. She stared at it. Early. Not 4 hours. Earlier than 4 hours. She came out of the interior office. Yara had her phone to her ear. Dana Reyes, mid-conversation. Marcus was on his feet. "Vincent just texted," she said. "Dominic is moving early." Marcus's expression did not change. "How early?" Her phone rang. "Vincent." She answered. "He moved the timeline," Vincent said. He was outside. She could hear wind, traffic, the specific acoustic texture of someone in a car park or on a street. "I don't know how he found out the federal piece was in motion, but he knows. He's going tonight." "Going where?" "The warehouse in Pilsen is empty. They moved out an hour ago. And Claire—" A pause, and in the pause she heard something in his voice she had heard only twice in 12 years, a quality that Vincent Romano did not permit himself in normal operation. "He's not going after me first." The cold that moved through her was not fear exactly. It was the specific sensation of a situation clarifying to its essential shape all at once, every layer stripped away until only the central fact remained. "He's coming here," she said. "I don't know your location, but he does. I don't know how, but he—" "Ferretti," she said. Ferretti had the burner number. Ferretti had spoken for 22 minutes. Ferretti had said he was heading to Phoenix, but Ferretti was Paul Ferretti, 20 years in this world, and Phoenix was a destination, and a destination required surviving the next 12 hours first. Ferretti told him, "Claire, get out of where you are right now." She was already moving. "Marcus." "Loading dock, west side," Marcus said. He had his jacket and her bag already in his hands. "Yara." "Finishing the call," Yara said, still on with Dana Reyes, voice level, giving the Pilsen warehouse address even though the warehouse was now empty, because the federal record needed to show she had provided it in real time, regardless of what Dominic had done to counter it. They were moving through the suite toward the back corridor when the building's fire alarm went off. Not a malfunction. Claire knew the difference. She had spent 12 years in buildings, understood their sounds, understood what a pulled alarm in the stairwell sounded like versus what a genuine system activation sounded like. This was a pulled alarm. Ground floor, most likely. It would empty the building, fill the lobby and the street exits with confused architects and paralegals and office workers. And in the crowd and the noise and the movement, 3 people trying to get out quietly would be. The fire alarm was loud enough to feel in the chest cavity. Claire moved without running. Running was visible. Running attracted attention. Running was what the alarm was designed to produce so that 3 people trying to exit quietly would look exactly like everyone else trying to exit quickly. She kept her pace calibrated to urgent but orderly, the pace of a professional who smells smoke and makes sensible decisions, and Marcus was half a step behind her left shoulder, and Yara was off her right, still on the phone with Dana Reyes, still talking, because the call could not end until Dana had everything she needed regardless of what was happening in this building right now. The back corridor was narrow and fluorescent lit and smelled of cleaning product and old carpet. A door at the end marked stairs, no propped doors, had already been propped by someone from the architecture firm 2 floors up who'd come down for a cigarette break and not yet returned. Claire went through it without breaking stride. "Yara," Marcus said. "Almost," Yara said into the phone. "Dana." "Yes. The warehouse is empty, they moved, but the statement from the secondary source covers the original Pilsen address and the full financial routing. You have enough for the RICO attachment, with or without the physical location." "Yes." A pause. "I understand, thank you." She ended the call and pocketed the phone. "She's moving. She said within the hour." "We don't have an hour," Marcus said. They were in the stairwell now, descending. Below them the sounds of a building evacuating. Voices, footsteps, the particular acoustic confusion of people pouring into enclosed space. Above them, nothing, which didn't mean nothing. "Loading dock," Claire said. "West side exit puts us on Aberdeen. I have the car on Aberdeen." Marcus was ahead of them now, one hand on the stair rail, eyes moving. If they know the building, they know the front exit and the Aberdeen side. The loading dock is the third option, and it's not on public maps, but it exists. And if Ferretti talked, he talked about the building, not the interior. "So the loading dock gives us maybe 60 seconds of advantage," Claire said. "Maybe. We take it." They hit the ground floor. The loading dock was through a maintenance corridor past the building super's office, a hallway that required knowing where it was, which Claire knew because she had walked the building on her first visit the same way she walked every space she intended to use for sensitive work. She turned left where everyone else was going, right toward the lobby, and pushed through a door marked Maintenance, Authorized Only. And they were in a different building suddenly, the behind-the-walls building, the one made of concrete block and exposed pipe, and a smell of diesel from the dock deliveries. The loading dock door was metal, industrial, and currently down. Marcus hit the manual release on the side panel, and it came up grinding and slow and loud, and there was nothing to be done about the noise except get through it quickly. December air hit them through the gap before it was fully open, cold, hard, the lake wind finding the loading dock alley immediately. The alley ran between the building and the parking structure to the west, and was currently empty. One dumpster, one utility vehicle parked against the far wall, nobody visible. Claire went through the gap as soon as it was body width. Marcus and Yara behind her. "Left," Marcus said. He was already moving, and she followed his line without questioning it, because in a physical situation, Marcus Webb's spatial judgment was the most reliable information she had. They moved left along the face of the parking structure toward the Aberdeen Street intersection. The car was a black Volvo SUV, nondescript, and it was 30 feet from the alley exit when the man stepped out from behind the parking structure's corner pillar. He was large, not tall but wide in the chest, wearing a dark jacket that was not thick enough for December, which meant he had been outside for a limited time or was used to discomfort or both. His hands were visible and empty, which was not reassuring because hands could change their contents in under a second, and the way he was positioned told Claire everything about his professional orientation. He looked at her, not at Marcus, at her. She was the target of recognition. Marcus stopped. The man said, "Just her. Other two walk away." His voice was accented, not Chicago, not regional. Something Eastern European that had been living in the American Midwest long enough to flatten its edges but not eliminate them. One of the outside operators. The Pilsen warehouse had moved its personnel, but the personnel still had assignments. "That's not happening," Marcus said. The man looked at Marcus for the first time, assessed him in the way trained people assess each other. Not with the civilian tendency to look at size, but with the professional tendency to look at posture, at weight distribution, at what the hands and the eyes were doing simultaneously. Whatever he saw in Marcus changed something in his expression slightly. Not retreat, recalibration. "The other two walk away," he said again, "or none of you do." Claire stepped forward beside Marcus and not behind him. "How many are you?" The man looked at her. He hadn't expected the question. He'd expected the negotiation to stay between himself and the man, the way it always did. And the woman stepping into the exchange on her own terms disrupted his script. "Enough," he said. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't reach for it. Eye contact was the only currency in this particular exchange. Let me tell you what's happening right now, she said, and her voice was steady in a way that she identified as useful and didn't try to analyze further. A federal task force received an actionable intelligence package approximately 12 minutes ago. That package includes the address of every location your employer has used in the last 72 hours, the financial documentation for the entire operation, and a recorded statement from a named source inside the organization. What's happening right now at this moment is that the operation you're employed on is ending, which means you are in Chicago on a contract that has already failed. The man's jaw moved slightly. He was thinking. The question is whether you're in Chicago as someone who was employed on a failed operation, she continued, or as someone who escalated a failed operation in a way that adds federal charges to your existing profile. She paused. I know which of those I'd choose. 20 seconds of silence. The wind moved through the alley. Somewhere on Aberdeen, a car accelerated. The man looked at Marcus one more time. Then he stepped back, put both hands in his jacket pockets, and walked away down the alley toward the street without another word. Marcus exhaled once, controlled. Car, he said. They moved. They were in the Volvo and moving on Aberdeen within 45 seconds. Marcus drove. Yara was in the passenger seat, phone already out, tracking. Claire was in the back seat with both hands flat on her thighs, the same posture she'd used at the conference table, the grounding gesture that kept the adrenaline from becoming noise. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from Vincent. She called back. He picked up on the first ring. Where are you? Moving. We're clear of the building. What's your situation? I'm in a car with Sal outside Wicker Park. A pause. She heard road noise on his end. Dominic made his first move 20 minutes ago. 2 of his people went to the Kenilworth house. The house is empty. I left 4 hours ago. But they were there, which means he's past the planning stage. He's committed. He's committed. Another pause. Claire. Roberto called me. Someone came to the restaurant site, the burned building, 3 of Dominic's people. Roberto was there with 2 of the insurance adjusters. He told me. She felt the cold come back. Roberto. They didn't touch him. They were sending a message about what happens next if the Chicago structure doesn't roll over. Vincent's voice was controlled, but she could hear what was underneath it, something raw that he was managing badly. He's using civilians as messaging now. That's where we are. She looked out the window. Chicago at night, lit and indifferent, the expressway ahead of them opening up. You need to be somewhere with people who are loyal to you specifically, not the organization, to you. I know where to go. Then go there and stay there. Do not engage Dominic directly. Whatever he does in the next hour, do not respond to it directly. And if he moves on me directly, then respond accordingly. But don't go looking for it. She paused. The federal action is moving. Dana Reyes has everything. It may take longer than we wanted, but it's moving. How long? I don't know. Hours. Maybe more. A lot can happen in hours. I know. She pressed her hand flat against the window for a moment, feeling the cold of the glass. Vincent, the forger's name is going to Gerald Ferris tonight for a morning filing. The document that was used against me, the Callaway meeting record, is going to be categorized as fabricated evidence in the divorce proceeding by morning. Whatever Dominic has left to leverage, that's not it anymore. A silence. You figured out the Callaway thing. I figured out it was a setup. Your underboss had someone planted in Callaway's office 8 months before the gala. He was building the case against me before he ever showed it to you. Another silence. Longer. I didn't know, he said. I know you didn't. She said it simply, without cruelty and without absolution. It was a fact. It wasn't the whole story, but it was a true part of it. Go somewhere safe. I'll be in touch. She ended the call. Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Where are we going? She looked at her phone. The missed calls, the texts, the Pilsen address that was now an empty warehouse, the chain of events that had moved from a coffee shop on Wabash to a loading dock alley in under 4 hours. She thought about Dana Reyes and what within the hour meant in federal operational terms, And she thought about Roberto at the burned building, and she thought about the man in the alley who had stepped back and put his hands in his pockets. "I need to think," she said. "We can drive. Drive north. Stay off the expressway." Marcus drove north. The city moved past the windows, neighborhoods changing, commercial to residential to commercial again, the repeating urban grammar of Chicago. Yara was quiet in the passenger seat, working her tablet, tracking what could be tracked. Claire's phone buzzed. A text from an unsaved number she recognized as the channel the anonymous messages had come from. The same line as the original texts, not Ferretti's burner, which meant there was a second person who had been trying to reach her and who was still active. The text said, "Dominic is at the restaurant site. With Roberto. He went himself." She read it twice. Dominic Vega had gone to the Burned River North restaurant personally, with Roberto still on site. She understood immediately what this was. It wasn't a negotiation, it wasn't a message. Dominic going personally to a site where a civilian employee was present was an announcement of intent. It said, "I am past caring about collateral." It said, "I will use whatever is in front of me." It said, "I know that Claire Bennett cares about the people in these businesses, and I am standing in front of one of them right now." It was bait. She knew it was bait. It was bait, and Roberto was 61 years old and had worked a kitchen for 19 years and was standing in the middle of it. "Marcus," she said. He had already seen the text via the mirror system. "I know. River North. I know." He was already changing lanes. "It's designed to pull us into the open," Yara said. She wasn't arguing. She was stating the operational reality, so it was acknowledged and absorbed and factored in. "I know," Claire said. "So we go anyway." "We go anyway." The Volvo turned east. What? The Burned River North restaurant was a block and a half off the main commercial strip, on a street that had been closed to through traffic by the fire investigation, though the closure barriers were the cheap orange plastic type that anyone who wanted to move them could move. At this hour, the block was dark except for the lighting the insurance company had set up for the assessment work and the ambient glow from the surrounding neighborhood. Marcus stopped the Volvo 2 blocks short. He got out first and was gone for 4 minutes. When he came back, his expression had changed in a specific way Claire had learned to read. Not worse exactly, but denser. "3 of them," he said. 2 outside, 1 inside with Dominic. Roberto is inside. He's not restrained that I can see, but he's not free either." He looked at her. "Dominic's outside security is positioned toward the street. They're watching for a frontal approach. Not a back approach. The fire damage is most extensive at the front of the building. The back kitchen structure is partially intact. There's a service entrance from the alley that the fire team has been using for access." She looked at the building from where they sat. 2 blocks was far enough that Dominic's outside people weren't looking at them. "You've been in the alley." "For about 90 seconds. "Can we get to the service entrance without crossing their sight line?" 1 block south, then east through a parking structure, then north through the alley. "Yes." She turned to Yara. "Stay with the car. If Marcus and I are not back in 15 minutes, call Dana Reyes directly and tell her Dominic Vega is physically present at the River North restaurant site with a civilian. Give her Roberto's name." "Claire, 15 minutes. If we're back before then, we won't need the call." Yara looked at her. "This is the part where I'm supposed to tell you not to go in there." "I know. So I'm telling you, don't go in there." "Noted." She got out of the car. She and Marcus moved south, then east, using building facades and the parking structure's shadow for cover. And it was cold in the way Chicago was cold at night in December. Not the wet cold of rain, but the dry structural cold of wind off water that found the gaps in clothing and settled into joints. She felt it in her shoulders and ignored it and focused on the alley. The service entrance was a steel door that the fire team had left unlocked for the assessment. A padlock hasp with no padlock, the lock removed for access and not yet replaced. Marcus eased it open with both hands flat on the metal, controlling the speed of the swing to manage the sound. It wanted to creak, and he denied it the creak, and they went through. The back of the restaurant smelled of wet char and chemical retardant, and underneath it, impossibly, The ghost of 19 years of cooking, garlic, wood smoke, something herbal that had soaked into the walls over decades and not yet burned completely out. The kitchen was partially intact, as Marcus had said. The rear wall was standing, the ceiling above the prep stations had survived. But the pass-through to the dining room was a blackened ruin, and the floor was tracked with soot and boot prints from the assessment team. She could hear voices from the dining room side. She moved to the edge of the pass-through and listened. Dominic's voice first. She knew it well, the underboss cadence she'd sat across from at 100 family dinners. The voice that had always been slightly too smooth. The voice that talked the way a man talks, who has practiced sounding trustworthy. Nobody's coming for you, Roberto. I want you to understand that. This is a business conversation. Then Roberto's voice, older, steadier than she would have expected from a man in this situation. I'm a cook. I cook food. I don't know what you think I know. I think you know where she is. I don't know where Mrs. Romano... Ms. Bennett, Dominic said. She's Ms. Bennett now, and she's been very active and very visible, and she's caused a significant amount of disruption to a situation that didn't require disruption. A pause. Where is she meeting her federal contact? I need an address. I told you, I'm a cook. A sound, not a strike, something more controlled, something that was pressure rather than impact. Roberto made a sound that was not quite pain, but in the neighborhood. Claire felt her jaw clench. She looked at Marcus. He shook his head once. Not yet, meaning the two outside hadn't been neutralized, and going in now with both of them unaccounted for was the tactical mistake. She nodded. She understood. She hated it, and she understood it. Her phone buzzed. She had it on silent and felt it in her coat pocket. She pulled it out in the dark of the kitchen. A text from Yara. Federal movement. 2 vehicles just turned onto the block from the north. Dark, unmarked. I think this is Donna. She showed the screen to Marcus. His expression shifted. Not relief exactly, but the controlled relaxation of a man watching the operational picture improve in a specific direction. He held up 2 fingers and pointed toward the outside of the building, then made a gesture that meant working on it. She put the phone away. In the dining room, Dominic said, I'll ask you again. Roberto said something she couldn't hear, low and stubborn. She stepped through the pass-through. She didn't think about it. She identified later that she had made the decision and executed it in the same half-second, that the sound Roberto had made and the federal vehicles turning onto the block had converged into a calculation that produced a single output. She stepped through into the burned dining room with its blackened ceiling and its insurance lighting and its smell of disaster, and she said, He doesn't know where I am. Dominic turned. He looked exactly as he had always looked. Good coat, focused attention, the ease that was his most consistent performance. But something had shifted underneath it. The ease looked different when the plan was coming apart. It looked like a coat that didn't quite fit anymore. The man beside Roberto, Dominic's inside security, moved his hand toward his jacket. Don't, she said, and something in her voice stopped him. She didn't know exactly what it was. She had spent 12 years being quiet and managed and careful, and what was in her voice right now was the other side of all that management, the thing that had been underneath the control the entire time. Dominic studied her. You came here yourself. Yes. Knowing this was exactly what it was. Yes. She held his eyes. Roberto, go out the back. Through the kitchen. There's a door on your left. Roberto didn't move immediately. He looked at Dominic, the reflex of a man who has been told to stay put and is assessing whether the instruction has changed. Roberto, she said, go. He went. She heard his footsteps through the kitchen, the creak of the service door, and then he was out and the dining room held 3 people, her and Dominic, and the man whose hand was still close to his jacket. The federal piece is done, she said to Dominic. You know that. You've known for the last 30 minutes. Why do you think you're standing in a burned restaurant instead of executing your plan? The plan is finished. Dominic's expression did not collapse. She hadn't expected it to. Men like Dominic did not collapse. They recalculated. She watched him do it. You have no idea what kind of 2 unmarked federal vehicles on the block, she said. Your outside security is going to encounter them in about 90 seconds. This is over. His jaw tightened. The calculation was running behind his eyes, the last one, the one that was looking for the move that wasn't there. You think a federal case makes you safe. I think you're a man who just watched his entire operation come apart and who is currently choosing between two options. Option 1, you make a decision in this room that adds a significant physical charge to the existing federal charges. She looked at him. Option 2, you walk out of here, get a lawyer, and spend the next few years in proceedings instead of in a situation that ends worse. And why would you? Because I don't want you dead, she said. It came out flat and honest. I don't want that in the world. I want you in a courtroom where every decision you've made in the last 2 months gets read into a public record. She paused. That's worse, and you know it's worse. The dining room was very quiet. Outside, she heard voices. The particular barked, clipped authority of federal agents making contact with someone who did not want to be contacted. Dominic heard it too. She watched his face. You built all of this, he said. Not to diminish it, more like a man reading a map he should have studied earlier. Every piece of it. Yes? And Romano never? No. He looked at her for another moment. Then he said, to the man beside him, put it away. The man's hand moved back to neutral. Dominic straightened his coat. He looked around the burned dining room. At the insurance lights, at the blackened walls, at whatever he was seeing in this particular ending. Then he looked at Claire once more, and his expression was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. Underneath the ambition and the calculation and the practiced ease, there was something almost simple, something that recognized a finality. He walked past her toward the back of the restaurant, toward the service door, toward the alley, toward whatever was waiting for him out there, and she let him go because where he was going and what he was walking into was already arranged, and her job right now was to stay in this room and not be in the alley when it resolved. She stood in the burned dining room alone and listened to the sounds from outside increase in volume, voices, then the sharp, specific vocabulary of an arrest in progress, then a second location, then a third, and she breathed the smell of char and old cooking and the ghost of 19 years of food being made by a man who had walked out the service door 60 seconds ago because she had told him to. Her phone rang. Marcus. She answered. Roberto is with me, Marcus said. He's fine. Outside security is in federal custody. Dominic? Coming out the back, she said. A pause, then, copy that. Dana Reyes wants to speak with you. Tell her I'll call in 10 minutes. She ended the call and stood in the quiet for a moment longer. Her hands were steady. She noticed that and filed it away. She had walked into a room because a man who made pasta for 19 years was in it, and she had not been able to stand outside while that was true, and the plan had worked, and Roberto was with Marcus, and Dominic Vega was walking into the alley where federal agents were waiting. The plan had worked. Every piece of it. The Callaway document, the secondary source, the recorded statement, the financial routing, Dana Reyes, the timing. 12 years of learning what a criminal organization looked like from the inside had produced a woman who knew exactly how to dismantle one from the outside. She walked through the burned dining room, through the blackened pass-through, through the ghost-smelling kitchen, and out the service door into the December alley where Marcus Webb was standing with Roberto, who looked older and colder and steadier than anyone had a right to look after the last hour. And when he saw her, he said, Mrs. Romano, in the old voice, the kitchen voice, the voice he'd used 1,000 times across a pass-through counter. And she said, It's Ms. Bennett, Roberto. And he said, Ms. Bennett, and nodded once, and that was the end of it. Roberto was 61 years old and had survived a firebombing of his kitchen and an hour in a burned dining room with Dominic Vega, and he absorbed all of that with the specific durability of a man who had been cooking professionally since he was 17 and understood that the work continued regardless of what the night had been. He asked Marcus if there was somewhere warm he could wait. Marcus put him in the Volvo with the heat running and Yara in the passenger seat, and Roberto sat in the back with his hands in his lap and looked out the window at the alley and didn't speak. Claire stood in the alley with Marcus for a moment, both of them breathing the cold air. Dana Reyes is on the north side of the building, Marcus said. She wants 5 minutes. I know. You should also know that Sal Marchetti called my number. I don't know how he got it, asking about Vincent. Vincent's not answering his phone. She looked at him. Since when? Last 40 minutes. She processed that. Vincent had been in a car with Sal outside Wicker Park. He was going somewhere with people loyal to him. He had not been at the building, had not been in the alley, was not part of what had just happened. But 40 minutes of not answering his phone in the middle of a night like this one was not nothing. Let me talk to Dana first, she said. Supervisory Special Agent Dana Reyes was standing on the north side of the building with a calm that was either professional composure or genuine steadiness. Claire had known her long enough to believe it was the second thing. She had 2 agents flanking her at a respectful distance, and she dismissed them with a look when Claire approached. Roberto? Dana said. In our car. Fine. Dana nodded. We have Dominic Vega in custody. 3 associates in custody. The 2 outside security. One of them is the outside talent. The name matches the cross-reference you provided. She paused. The warehouse in Pilsen was empty when we got there. I know. Ferretti tipped Dominic before he left for Phoenix. We're locating Ferretti. He has a brother in Phoenix who runs a construction company. He's probably already on I-55. Claire looked at Dana. He gave me the statement. He gave me the financial routing and the forger's name. I would not close a deal with him, but I'd consider what value he has going forward. Noted. Dana looked at her. The forger. Gerald Ferris has the name and is filing a motion in the divorce proceeding this morning. The Callaway document gets categorized as fabricated evidence on the record by end of business today. Whatever Dominic's defense uses, that particular tool is burned. Dana studied her for a moment with the expression she used when she was deciding how much to say. You understand what you did tonight. I reported actionable intelligence, and I retrieved a civilian from a location where he was being coerced. Both of those are clean. Claire. Both of those are clean, Dana. I'm not going to characterize it differently, and I'm not going to let you characterize it differently, because the characterization matters, and we both know it. Dana was quiet for a moment. You walked into that building. I walked through a kitchen. The building was not secure. She held Dana's eyes. Is there a problem with what happened tonight, from a federal standpoint? A long pause. No, Dana said. There's not. She turned to look at the building. The burned-out River North restaurant with its insurance lighting and its smell of old disaster. The Romano legitimate businesses, the people you asked me to remember. Yes. We're going to need to work through the organizational structure to separate the clean from the contaminated. That takes time. During that time, those businesses are going to be in a difficult position. I know. I'm prepared to assist the separation process as a consultant. I have documentation of the legitimate operations going back 9 years. I know every financial relationship, every contractual dependency, every employee account. She had prepared the sentence in her head 3 weeks ago when she first began to understand that this night was coming. I'm not doing it for Vincent. I'm doing it for the people who depend on those operations. Dana looked at her for a long moment. I'll make the call. Thank you. She walked back to the alley. She had work to do. Yet, Vincent Romano surfaced at 2:17 in the morning. He called her direct line, the business line, the one she'd left unchanged precisely because she'd known he might need it on a night like this one. She was in the West Loop office, the one that was no longer compromised because the people who had been watching it were in federal custody, sitting at the conference table with Marcus across from her and Yara at the whiteboard reconstructing the night's timeline for the documentation they'd need in the days ahead. She answered, Where are you? Evanston. A pause. A house. Belongs to a man I trust, one of the few left. His voice was different from what it had been on every other call tonight. Lower. The operational surface stripped away. I heard Dominic was picked up. An hour ago. Detroit people? The federal package covers the coalition structure. Dana Reyes is good at this. She paused. The New Jersey delegation will be next. There are 3 separate federal districts involved now. A long quiet. It's over. The immediate threat is over. The legal proceedings will take years. I know what that means. She didn't respond to that. He knew what it meant because he was a man who had spent 30 years navigating legal proceedings from the outside, and he was now going to navigate them from a different position, and what that was going to cost him was not something she was responsible for naming. Claire. His voice changed again, something more difficult underneath it. The man who tipped Dominic. Ferretti. Yes. He was with me for 15 years before Dominic. He stopped. I thought he was. People make calculations when they're scared, she said. It's not always about loyalty. Sometimes it's just about survival. Is that what you think about what I did at the gala? She sat with that question. She was tired, the bone-deep tired of a night that had required her to be completely present for 6 hours without a margin for error. And tired was not the right condition for this conversation. But he had asked it directly, and she had never been the kind of woman who avoided direct questions when the answer was real. No, she said. What you did at the gala was different. You didn't calculate. You didn't weigh anything. You reacted from a position of absolute certainty about your own authority, and I was on the wrong side of that certainty, and you didn't even look at me when you said it. She paused. That's not a calculation. That's just who you were. Silence. Were, he said. I don't know who you are now. I've seen the last 3 weeks of you, and they've been different. But 3 weeks is 3 weeks. I know. The divorce proceeds as filed, she said. Gerald has everything. It'll be clean. She meant, I'm not going to make it hard for you, and I'm not going to revisit it, and that's the last thing I'm going to give you that belongs to the marriage rather than to the situation we just navigated together. I know, he said again, quietly. I'm not asking for anything different. Okay. A pause. The chandelier. In the ballroom. You picked that. She hadn't expected that. She was silent for a moment. Yes. 11 weeks. I found out from the importer. He called about the second order after you left. We got to talking. Another pause. He said you argued with him about the refraction index for 4 days. The machine cut drops don't throw the same light. He was trying to charge the hand cut price for machine work. She heard something that might have been a short sound on his end. Not quite a laugh, not quite grief, the sound of a man in the space between those two things. Go to sleep, Vincent. There's nothing useful to do at 2 a.m. Yeah, he said. She ended the call and sat with her hands flat on the table and looked at the whiteboard where Yara had been writing and didn't say anything for a while. The divorce finalized in February. Gerald Ferris filed the motion on the Callaway document the morning after the River North night, and by end of business, it was on the record as fabricated evidence in a pending dissolution proceeding. Dominic Vega's defense team, when they were retained 3 days later, found the Callaway thread already cauterized. The document that had been their insurance policy against Claire's credibility was now itself a piece of evidence against their client. The federal proceedings were exactly what Donna Reyes had said: complex, multi-district, slow. The RICO attachment covered the coalition structure across Chicago, Detroit, and New Jersey. It would run for years. Claire was deposed once, in March, for 4 hours, in a conference room in the Dirksen Federal Building, and she answered every question she was asked with the same precision and calm she brought to every meeting. And when it was over, Dana Reyes met her in the hallway and said, "You were the cleanest source I've had in 15 years. And Claire said, "I'll take that," and went back to work. The Romano legitimate businesses were a different problem. Dana had made the call she'd promised, and the federal review process identified a transition structure that allowed the restaurants, the property management operations, and the logistics contracts to continue functioning under court-supervised administration while the organizational separation was completed. Claire served as a consultant to the administrator for 6 weeks, working from documentation she had maintained, and which was, as she had told Dana, complete to a degree that the administrator said he had never encountered in 30 years of this kind of work. Roberto's restaurant was rebuilt. Insurance covered 60%. The Romano family estate, the legitimate portion, the portion that survived the legal proceedings, covered the rest, at Vincent's direction through Gerald Ferris, with no conditions attached. Roberto was back in his kitchen by April. Claire read about it in a message from Elena Marchetti, who had started texting her occasionally cautiously in the way of a woman who had seen things clearly for a long time and was still deciding what to do with that clarity. She texted back, "Good. Tell him I said so." Elena replied with a single line, "He already knows." Clearline security and logistics doubled in size between December and the following September. It happened the way real growth happened, not with a single dramatic expansion, but with the accumulation of work that was done well, and the referrals that followed from work done well, and the reputation that accreted around a firm that had handled an extraordinarily difficult situation with extraordinary competence and had not, at any point, lost a civilian. Dr. Yara Osei became a named partner. Marcus Webb became head of operations and hired a team of 6 that he ran with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything, and the team reflected his judgment, experienced, precise, and composed of people who had the specific professional quality of caring about the outcome rather than the appearance of caring about the outcome. Claire hired 2 more analysts and a legal liaison and moved the firm to a larger space in River North not the same building, a different one, 4 blocks north, 8th floor with a view of the city that she had chosen because the light was good in the mornings. She did not spend 11 weeks negotiating the terms. She spent 2 hours, got a fair price, and moved in. She worked. That was the most accurate thing she could say about the 9 months that followed the River North night. She worked, and the work was real, and the distinction between a life where her effort sustained someone else's empire and a life where it sustained her own was something she felt every day without making a ceremony of it. There were hard days. Days when the adrenaline debt from the previous 6 weeks came due, and she sat in her office and felt the weight of what she had carried, not just the 3 weeks of the crisis, but the 12 years before it, the long, slow work of being invisible, the accumulated cost of having been brilliant in a room where nobody was looking for brilliance in her direction. She felt it, and she sat with it, and she didn't perform recovery for anyone's benefit. She just kept working. She filed her taxes under Claire Bennett for the first time in 12 years. The name on the Clearline letterhead said Bennett. The name on her office door said Bennett. She had been Bennett when she started, and she was Bennett again. And the years in between had happened and had cost things, and had also built things, and she was done sorting which was which. The charity fundraiser was in October. It was a private security industry event, a dinner and auction benefiting a workforce development program that placed veterans in private sector security roles. Clearline was a co-sponsor. Marcus had done 3 hires from the program in the past year and had advocated for the sponsorship, and Claire had agreed without hesitation because it was the right thing, and because the program did what she believed in. It gave people with the right instincts a structure in which to apply them. She had not known Vincent Romano would be there. She found out in the week before the event through the program's donor list, which she reviewed as a co-sponsor. Romano Ventures, LLC, a new entity, registered in Illinois 6 months ago, clean structure, no legacy connection she could identify. Donor level, significant. Contact, Vincent Romano. She sat with that information for 2 days and decided nothing about it except that she was going to the fundraiser because Clearline was a co-sponsor and her presence was appropriate, and she was not in the business of reorganizing her professional life around proximity to her ex-husband. She wore navy. Not the black dress. She had retired the black dress mentally, if not physically, assigned it to the category of things that belonged to a different version of her life. Navy, well-cut, her own choice made in under 10 minutes in a store where the salesperson did not know her name. She arrived at the venue, a hotel ballroom in the Gold Coast, smaller than the Romano Gala, 600 people rather than 400. The particular energy of a room full of people who did security work and were therefore attuned to exits and sightlines and the position of strangers. And she worked the room the way she always worked rooms now, directly, with her own name and her own company and her own handshake and no one to stand behind. She saw him an hour in. He was across the room, near the bar. And he was alone in the way he had never been alone at events like this during their marriage. No orbit of men calibrating their laughter to his mood, no visible security, no particular performance of presence. He was wearing a suit she didn't recognize, which meant he was still buying his own clothes. And he was talking to a woman in her 40s who turned out, when Claire later identified her, to be the program director of the Veteran Placement Initiative. He was listening to her with the focused attention he usually reserved for men he needed something from. He looked smaller. Not physically. He was still the same size, still the same bearing. But there was something reduced in the space he took up, and after a moment she identified it as the absence of the performance. The ease that had always characterized him at events, the ease that she now understood had always been performance, was gone. He just looked like a man at a fundraiser, listening to a program director, writing a check she later heard was considerably larger than the donor-level minimum. She did not go to him. She continued through the room, her conversations, her co-sponsor obligations, the specific work of being present at an event you've helped create. He found her instead. It was near the end of the evening. The auction completed, the dinner done, the room thinning as people said their goodbyes. She was at the edge of the space, near the windows that looked out over the Gold Coast at night, having finished a conversation with the program director that she'd found genuinely interesting, and she heard him behind her and turned. He looked older than he had in February, not in a damaged way, in the way of a man who has absorbed significant consequence and is standing on the other side of it and knows the difference between where he was and where he is. There was something more real in his face than she had seen in 12 years of looking at it. "Claire," he said. "Vincent." "I didn't know you'd be here," he said, and she believed him. "Co-sponsor," she said. "I know, I saw the listing." He paused. "Clearline, I've been following it, in the press. Congratulations." "Thank you." He looked at the window, at the city outside. "Romano Ventures," he said, before she could ask. "Legitimate, all of it, real estate development primarily, affordable housing projects. I have a team that does the work. I stay out of their way." He paused again. "I sold everything else, the legacy holdings, the restaurant group. I sold it to Roberto. Group of investors he put together. I gave him favorable terms." She looked at him. "Roberto bought the restaurant." "Technically, a restaurant group. A beat. He's adding a second location in the spring." Something moved in her chest, warm and small and real. "That's good," she said. "Yes." He was looking at the city again. "I testified. In the federal proceedings. Proactively. My attorney's recommendation, but also my own." He said it without apparent need for response, laying it out as fact. "I cooperated fully. It accelerated the proceedings, and it cost a significant amount. But it was accurate. It was the accurate thing to do." "I heard," she said. She had. Dana Reyes had mentioned it in passing, with the professional neutrality that didn't quite conceal that it had mattered to the case. "It didn't feel like enough," he said. "The testifying. I want you to know I know that. I'm not telling you about it because I think it balances anything." She looked at him. He was still looking at the window, and then he turned and looked at her, and she saw in his face the specific expression of a man who has rehearsed nothing for this moment, who is just standing in it, with what he has, with what he is now. "You built the whole thing," he said. "The relationships, the network, the intelligence, all of it. The thing I thought was mine." He paused. "I didn't see it because I didn't look." "No," she said. "You didn't." "I'm sorry, Claire." He said it simply, without architecture. No explanation wrapped around it, no context offered to soften it, no request embedded in the word sorry for her to absorb and respond to in a particular way. Just the sentence, standing on its own. She looked at him for a moment, at the face she had lived with for 12 years, at the person who was inside it now, who had not been entirely there before, or who had been there but buried under certainty, under performance, under 30 years of being the man in the room who never had to look at anything he didn't want to see. "I know you are," she said. Not, "It's okay." Not, "I forgive you." Not the version of this conversation that required her to offer something she didn't have or reduce the truth of what had happened into something that fit neatly into a resolution. She had spent 12 years reducing things to fit neatly. She was done with that. He nodded. He heard the difference. "How's the firm?" he said, after a moment, shifting to the ground they could stand on, not because what had been said wasn't enough, but because it was complete. There was nothing more to add to it. Growing, she said. We have a federal consulting contract now, 2 state contracts. Marcus is building an operations division. She paused. Yara is working on an intelligence analysis methodology that 3 universities have expressed interest in licensing. Yara, he said. The partner. The partner. He nodded again. He was smiling slightly. Not the performance smile, not the gala smile, something smaller and more undefended. Good, he said. That's good. He looked at the room behind them, the thinning crowd, the fundraiser winding down. The program here, the veteran placement, Marcus pulled people from it. 3 hires, all performing well. I want to do more with it, a full workforce development partnership if the program director is interested. He paused. I was going to ask you, not for permission, I don't. I want your firm's assessment, whether the structure makes sense, as professionals. She looked at him. You want to hire Clearline to assess a workforce development partnership. If you're taking the work, he held her eyes, and the look was careful and straightforward and entirely without subtext. It was a professional inquiry from a man who understood exactly what he was asking and what he was not asking. She considered it for a moment. Not long. The consideration was genuine. She turned it over, looked at it from the relevant angles, the professional ones, and what she found was that it was a real project, and he was a real client, and the work was work she believed in. Send a proposal to the firm, she said. Yara handles new client intake. She'll assess it without favor. That's all I'm asking, he said. They stood at the window for another moment. The Gold Coast outside glittered with the particular cold beauty of a Chicago October night, the lake somewhere beyond the buildings doing what the lake always did, present, vast, indifferent to the events of any individual life. She had looked out at the city from 100 windows over the years and seen different things each time, depending on who she was standing beside and what she was carrying. Tonight she was standing beside no one in particular and carrying only herself, and the city looked exactly like what it was. Enormous, ongoing, full of people making their calculations, building their things, paying their costs, surviving their nights. I should find Marcus, she said. We're co-hosting the close. Of course. He stepped back, the small courtesy of giving her the space to move. It was good to see you, Claire. She looked at him one last time. Take care of yourself, Vincent, she said, and she meant it the way she meant most things. Without ornamentation, without performance, with the plainness of something true. She turned and walked back into the room, toward Marcus and Yara and the work of closing an event they had helped to build, and she did not look back at the window. Behind her, the city continued, the lake continued. Vincent Romano stood at the window for another moment, and then he moved, and the evening closed over the space where he had been, and the room was just a room again, full of people going about the ordinary, essential work of their lives. Pause. Clearline Security and Logistics filed its annual report in November. Revenue up 62% from the prior year. 7 full-time staff, 3 contractors, 2 active government contracts, 1 pending federal consulting engagement. Client base. Clean, documented, growing by referral. Claire signed the report on a Tuesday morning in her office with the good light, the 8th floor north-facing windows that caught the lake sky in the mornings, and held it for an hour before the angle shifted. She signed it with the pen she kept in the top drawer of her desk. A plain pen, nothing special about it, the kind of pen you used when the work was what mattered and the instrument was just an instrument. She sent the report to the accountant and closed the folder and looked at the whiteboard on the wall across from her desk. It held the current project list in her own handwriting. 8 active engagements, 2 in development, Marcus's operations expansion timeline, Yara's licensing discussion with the second university. She had built it. Every line on that board, every name in those files, every relationship in the network that kept the firm's work flowing and the people employed and the whole structure functioning. She had built it in 10 months from a cleared-out marriage and a business plan and the accumulated competence of 12 years of being the most important invisible person in every room she entered. She looked at the whiteboard for a moment longer. Then she picked up the next file on her desk and got to work.